Let's get it started.
Double O.
Think like a rapper.
Check, 1, 2. It's your man Double O, and you are back with Think Like a Rapper, episode 111. This week's guest I've been following for a while through her Water and Music newsletter, podcast. Her name is Cherie Hu. She's a music business journalist. I think she has some really interesting ideas. She focuses a ton on where tech and music meet, and that inevitably points forward, sometimes forecasting what may happen in the future as technology evolves and music catches up. We find ourselves in an interesting time right now where things that may have been faux pas or things that may have not been taken seriously almost immediately the next day became not only the only way to communicate, but the most important ways to possibly find revenue streams and new ways with which to interact with your fan base if you're a musician. And so I wanted to sit down and talk with her about how this time has affected her business and what she thinks may come out of this as we begin to uncover through our limitations what we can do to innovate and move the business forward. I think that the story of streaming being a loss leader so that everyone comes to pay to go see a live show is being rewritten as we speak, since streaming is down and there are no live shows. And so figuring out what happens next was definitely something I wanted to get her opinion on. So we connected the dots. Cherie Hu, Think Like a Rapper. Let's get it. What's going on? This is Think Like a Rapper. And today I have somebody who I've been following on Twitter for a while, and an amazing journalist in this digital era who does simply more than just write meme-friendly clickbait articles, who takes the time to deep dive. And her name is Cherie Hu. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm doing pretty well. Just easing back into this week after a pretty restful weekend.
Okay. So you are able to actually separate the two, the weekends.
I've been trying. Definitely early on. I would say early on it was difficult, and I did do some work over the weekend, but in terms of mentally compartmentalizing, saying, okay, like now today's like primarily a work day rather than like primarily a rest day.
You, before this, you weren't really going into the office all that much, were you, right?
No. Yeah. So actually in that sense, the state of being mostly remote, that has like not been a huge disruption on my part. Yeah. Cause I would like work in a bunch of different co-working spaces or coffee shops or sometimes from home. So I was always remote, but I guess I took for granted the fact that I could always work from wherever. Like the way that my brain works, I prefer to like switch locations every couple hours. To be like, and also I'm based in New York, and just like taking in the energy of the city is something that I like to do from time to time. And so that's been disruptive, and that I don't have access to that anymore.
And then don't you end up spending entirely too much on coffee for free Wi-Fi? Like it ends up being like a $25 Wi-Fi bill over there.
Yes. I've I was thinking about this just yesterday. Yeah, like whether it's essentially like paying coffee to access a co-working space, that namely the coffee shop for a couple hours, or I did have a lot of like coffee meetings during the week in Manhattan, and I realized like people don't really need that much coffee. Like a lot of like if you're having like multiple coffee meetings in a week, you might be like, drinking multiple cups of coffee a day, and now I'm just like been sticking to one. It's like, maybe is there a way to meet with people in an interesting environment that doesn't involve having to drink something? That's fine.
It's funny because I think it has been interesting. I was talking about that with somebody earlier. I feel like at this time now you're realizing, if you take the time to really sit back, all these random habits that these little things that have just become habituated to your life so quickly and easily, like you said, like drinking coffee at all. It's like, oh, if I stop in this place, well, I mean, I have to get coffee because I'm here. I can't buy like a bottle of water or a candy bar, and then and trying to I've been taking the time to try to deconstruct some of that and be like, is this even necessary after, all this stuff sort of lightens up? But since you kind of started in a space already that was remote, for you, just to start this off, how has your business changed since everything kind of locked down?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I mean, mostly it's been thankfully really positive. So I have over the past year, I've been focusing a lot on my own newsletter, which has a paid Patreon membership attached to it, and I've been getting a lot of new members joining just over the past 2 months alone, which is like there's some kind of like cognitive dissonance in my brain because it's like, wait, people, the music industry is really struggling right now. People are out of jobs. They probably like don't have as much disposable income to spend on membership. Trying to figure out like what's going on. This is great, but what's going on? And I think that's because now that touring is off the table, people are realizing that that's a lot of the digital economy around music right now. If you look at it isolated from touring, it's not that sustainable for a lot of artists, or it feels like they're just like churning out a lot of content for free, kind of as a marketing stepping stone to drive like sales of tours or like sales of merch, rather than having digital be really like a core standalone experience for the fan, let alone like an income source for the artist. Whereas like one of the first things I realized is that there's like a wider reckoning in the industry about taking the cycle of like releasing an album on streaming, maybe not breaking even on it for like a year or so, but then going on tour and like that being higher margin for you. I think people took that cycle for granted. And now we're in like a very extreme situation where in like most areas of the world, live shows don't exist. And so like, how do you close that cycle in an interesting and sustainable way? Like once you release an album, can you make an online digital only experience that fans will pay for, or that can at least like close that gap in value that's now been lost? So I think people are much more interested in exploring the intersection of music and tech than maybe they were before, because they were focused on brick and mortar touring.
Yeah, it's also, I do wonder, like we talked about just before with like the ridiculous coffee habit, right? When you realize that you were spending, let's say on lunch, $25, $50 a day, whatever it is, right? And you take that off the table because now you're home. And your DoorDash orders might be as ridiculous, but I do wonder if it's not necessarily that people have less money, but now it's shifted in terms of its usage, because it's like, well, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be paying for a Metro card, or at least the same way. So maybe I can commit that $7 that I wanted to. But to piggyback off of that, have you watched your consumption habits change since you've been at home? I know you were the first person to report, at least, or you were the first person that I saw that was reporting that streaming numbers were down in March, and I know podcast numbers are down as well, and it's this very sort of interesting thing where you're like, you would think that everybody has all this time at home, and so they would just turn a Spotify playlist on or something like that and clean the house or whatever. But that's clearly not happening. And so to start, I wanted to know if there was anything for you that has changed, like things that you've stopped doing, or things that you were like, oh, that's just attached to that other habit. Now I'm doing something totally different. And then we can get into the larger exploration of what the hell's going to happen if there are no shows and no one streams. What is the industry?
So much has changed. What I've learned over time, like over the past 5 to 6 weeks, is that my sense of music consumption is heavily tied to two things. One, a sense of routine, and two, a sense of movement. And I think this is sorry. I think this is partially because of the way that even like the streaming services themselves market their product. Like, I think Spotify is the most aggressive with this. They're like, we're soundtracking every moment in your life, whether you're driving to work or like on the subway or at the gym or in whatever like location that's not in your house. Like they're very much like encouraging on the go mobile lifestyle. Sorry. And so so my consumption habits were very closely associated with that. I only learned retrospectively though. Like I listened to a ton of music. I took the subway every day. So I always listen to it in the subway. Often to like get myself in a certain mental state to get like ready for the day, to like pumped up for the day. And
not hear the homeless person screaming behind you.
Sure. Yes. Exactly. Yes. Actually, that's a very important purpose of the subway is to kind of like, it's a very New York thing, right? To like, kind of tune yourself out from the world. Yeah, exactly. And then so once that sense of daily routine went away, I just couldn't access the opportunity to like listen to certain kinds of music at least. And then I realized like being sheltered at home, in part to like, as a way to cope with the situation, I wanted experiences that were so much more immersive, rather than just like lean back. And so I've definitely been watching a lot more shows on Netflix. I've been playing a lot more video games, like definitely more than in like the past couple months combined. I would say like really diving into games, just because I'm like only going outside around like once a week to do grocery shopping. And so if I'm like staying inside for that long, if the weather's so nice outside, it's like what's a more like imaginative way to access that? And there are a lot of games that that can help players do that. Sorry, so like one example would be Animal Crossing.
Yeah, everybody's on that.
Yeah,
I haven't downloaded it or I didn't
Okay.
have the ability to play it, but yeah, I keep seeing it everywhere.
Yeah. So that's a great example because you're on like a deserted island and it's like very beachy and you get to build your own house, things like that. The music that I am so now that I'm getting finally like back into some sense of routine and of some semblance of like a daily like regular like work schedule, I realize that I'm listening to more music, which is interesting. Like now I'm like, okay, now it's time to work. I'm gonna put on like a certain, and it's interestingly, it's only certain kinds of music. I think because now is like a slightly more like stressful situation, at least in New York. I'm listening to a lot more like down tempo, chill music. I've done some research into, and I'm also an avid listener of these lo-fi hip hop like playlists, and I know like activity around those has been going up a lot. I've definitely contributed to that. And I have so a lot of artists. Some artists have postponed their albums, but a lot of them have still like gone ahead with releases, and I have listened to them, but I realize it's not as like I prefer to have like a more immersive experience around it as opposed to just like having it be fully lean back. Yeah.
Do you find yourself building that sort of experience? I mean, I think that this is something that I've noticed as lo-fi has kind of risen in prominence in where I hear it, whether it be hotel elevators or at cool coffee shops or whatever. That it is one of those things, especially if there's no words, that you can build, like you said, an entire immersive experience if you have that playing while you're playing video games, while you're eating these sort of whatever sort of chips, that it allows you to kind of create this world. And it's interesting for me. It might be because I'm an old man, but like I was never it's always hard for me to buy into playlists in general. Lo-fi is actually the easiest thing for me, but for the most part, it's always been like, I'm going to listen to this album right now. Like I'm going to go, I feel like listening to Khalees's first album, that that anniversary had passed a couple months ago, and it's just like, oh, let me dive into that, or let me dive into this older 90s hip hop album. It's always, I've always been someone who never believed in the playlist idea because it always felt like anecdotally, most people that I spoke to never heard a song that they really liked or an artist that they really got into, sort of based in, at least in the Spotify playlist sort of space. It's always been a, hey, my friend said, check this out. I checked it out, or I was at this show, they opened, I thought it was cool. And then you kind of dive into it. And I do wonder if, I think we're always in this weird sort of space, and feel free to, chime in, disagree, agree with me, that the music industry consistently makes the same mistake, oddly enough, of undervaluing music's cultural importance. And so deals are often made, like we talked about, you had this this closed loop of revenue stream where it's like, okay, it starts with, during the Napster era, right? Where the iTunes music store, the original deals I think done were like licensing deals, because they didn't think of it as, they were still thinking that at some point someone's going to want to purchase a CD or some sort of, a larger product. So they cut these deals that were really bad because they never thought that, like, oh no, this is actually what distribution is going to be. And it's the same issue that happened with Spotify and the streaming services, where they were like, oh, okay, this is the thing that will hopefully get people to buy in, and then we'll sell them the real thing, the $17 piece of plastic that we've been used to selling them. And it never happens. It always becomes that becomes the distribution model. And then you see they're always having to go back and renegotiate these better deals because they didn't think of it with any sort of importance on the front end. And I wonder if this again is another case of it, where basically what the streaming services were saying was music is a thing that you do when you do all these other things. It's not something that you do, that you actively listen to anymore. It's not like, it's not the thing that you say, oh, I'm in the house, let me pull up this 12-inch vinyl and I want to listen to whatever, Dark Side of the Moon, whatever, and I'm going to have this experience listening to it, and this is the way I consume this media. It is, oh, I have to clean my house, let me find the clean my house playlist and put it on, and it doesn't matter. And there's it's weird, because what ends up happening then is no connections are actually built to the artists that exist in that space. And then what happens is, when something like this occurs, people now don't have the need to do those, right? I'm not listening to the commuter, soundtrack. So now I'm listening to none of those things that are going on, and I don't care, because I never really bought into what those artists were, the world that they were trying to build. Ultimately. And I wonder how much music's streaming numbers were propped up by those sort of generic, not real fan sort of streams, versus Dua Lipa, or somebody that you can say, okay, they have a for real fan base. They have a legitimate, I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but
I'm taking this all in, and I totally agree. This is the issue that I have with some narratives that have been going around in the media over the last year about streaming, or even like Spotify specifically, quote unquote, saving the music industry. Because if you look at the aggregate numbers for recorded music, you could argue that is true. Like, paid subscriptions have like brought the recorded music side of the industry back to a state of growth in the aggregate. But yeah, absolutely. If you look at the artist level, and this is also why I have like mixed feelings whenever I hear, and then this is like still the case, so many artists, like the first thing that comes to mind when they like release a new single, release a new album, is, how do I get on a playlist? And like, if it's the right playlist, like a really renowned like cultural curator. Like I'm thinking of like a channel like Colors on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
I know they have like a really good track record, and so if you like collaborate with them, you reach like a really captive audience. Like that's a great example. But for the most part, I feel like a lot of artists are just trying to get any placement possible. And the issue with that is that with like playlists in general, and especially with Spotify playlists, if you're banking your growth on on that channel, you're banking your growth on something that you can't control, which especially if you're like early on trying to build a foundation, a career foundation as an artist, that it just seems like a lost cause to me.
100%.
Yeah. And I think now in the situation, a lot of people in music are realizing that what brought the recorded music industry back to stated growth was a very like lean back, functional aggregation like model for music. And I think now because people are stuck at home and actually crave more like human connection, they're actually more open to more open to engaging with artists on more direct to consumer channels, as you would call it. So like not so much on, so audio streaming in the aggregate has gone down, which is also very surprising to me. In contrast, maybe this is because the supply has gone up, but so many like people are watching music live streams now. They're actually like garnering hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views, especially with these bigger festivals. A lot more artists are launching Patreon pages, artists and venues, and a couple of them are doing quite well. And this kind of raises the question. So I guess as someone who's had a Patreon page for a little over a year now, I've always thought it would be a really interesting avenue for artists to pursue, and they just like weren't prioritizing it for whatever reason. I think this still goes back to like how touring always took primacy in a lot of artists' careers. But now, in realizing that streaming is kind of like, ironically, I think the promise of streaming was that it would be more direct to consumer, but it actually became even less. Like if you just track how the money flows through this system. So so they're looking into a lot more direct to consumer channels. I guess live streaming and membership being two of the primary ones.
Yeah, it's been very interesting for me, even in terms of thinking about the podcast and in terms of thinking about, the majority of my income comes from touring, being on the road with Lupe Fiasco. And we've had entire, at least, European tour canceled, regular American tour canceled in the last, in this time. And I'm hearing that potentially, I know that big tours may not come back until 2022, with a lot of other sort of, because they just won't risk the booking time it's going to take to put, an arena tour together. It's going to take all of 2021. And really, a lot of other sort of maybe even smaller shows not coming back till fall 2021, again, for the same thing, because now you have all these people have not, tours that were supposed to happen or shows are supposed to happen, all the money has stopped. So there's no front ends that have been paid out. It's almost like everything is going to have to be renegotiated in order to even get it going again. And so it's been a very interesting, on a couple podcasts ago, I made it as a joke, but I actually have thought about it in terms of serious, the economics of it. There was an Overheard LA thing that said that it was like two people talking on Zoom conference call, and it was like, oh, we're all cam girls now.
Oh my god.
Right. And
oh gosh.
but when you think about the mechanics of not simply just the cam space, but the YouTube influencer space, the digital economy, I feel like there's been for the longest time, there's always been this separation where, people look at, I've been to places where, especially in the music industry, this happened. I've been to places where you're at an event and a YouTube influencer or even musician who's making a ton of money will kind of introduce themselves in a room with, let's say, somebody who might be on the radio, or an A&R who might who might be working with some new artists, and they will be totally dismissive of any of that person's success, because they're basically like, oh, that's just that little YouTube thing. Like, you're not really in the music industry, even if you're making $1 million a month on your YouTube channel, because it's like, oh, you sing covers or you're not a real artist. Like there's always been this sort of weird, dismissive nature of everybody on that side of the digital economy.
Yeah.
And I feel like now, especially, it's just fully arrived. It's like instantly in a day, it's like, oh no, we're here. And now this is the way. And all the old artists now have to fumble through bad IG Live audio to quickly try to accelerate to catch up to, the 8-year-old YouTube influencer that has been, making $10,000 a month or whatever.
Yeah.
Because their entire economy has disappeared. And so because you've been a part of that for a while, do you have any insight on what you think happens now if live music doesn't come back for a year? Like how how stuff might be monetized, because if streams are low, there's a potential obviously for merch, digital merch or digital sort of content, but with all that stuff really low, where do you think the money may come from in order to float even artists in the music industry into hopefully the return of shows?
Yeah. Oh gosh, so many thoughts. So two things. So one, I have been kind of like crystallizing thoughts around this as well. Like what we were saying earlier, namely that the mechanics of being a musician in this environment is I see it as being similar to both like YouTube vloggers and to podcasters actually. So I'll just like I'll address those two briefly. So yeah, as you're saying, like it's very similar to like the YouTube vlogger life because especially if you look at how a lot of artists are going to Twitch, for instance. Like this is true for both Twitch and YouTube. For sure, both of those platforms reward consistency, whereas they're especially at like the major artist level, most artists only use YouTube as just like essentially depositories for the music videos. So they might only post like 6-7 times a year if they're releasing that much music that year. Whereas some bloggers are getting so many views and subscribers because they're like posting every single day, or at least like once or a couple times a week. That's definitely a cadence that artists are not used to. And if you compare like touring with that mechanic, touring is essentially like playing the same show over and over again in different cities, right? And it's you could like change the set list from like one show to the next, but it's mostly the same, especially if you're building the tour around a specific album. Whereas with like once you're online and you can instantly reach a global audience, you have to constantly keep the content fresh. Otherwise, people won't keep coming back, and that's definitely like a skill and just like a mindset, an effort that a lot of artists didn't really feel the need to invest a lot of time in, because that just wasn't their forte. Their forte was like making albums and then performing them in person. So I've definitely noticed that difference. And then I've noticed a ton of parallels right now between the music live streaming landscape and podcasting. And I think the main connecting thread is the lack of discovery. So in both of those areas, like live streaming discovery and podcast discovery aren't that good right now. And
At
so
all.
not at all. I'm sure you've like experienced this yourself, like or encountered this in the podcast side, and then on the live streaming side, I just noticed like as a fan, it's like either like simultaneously overwhelming and difficult to like find a good live stream to listen to that's like tailored to my interests, or to actually keep up to date with artists who I follow about when they're going live. And so in both situations, you have artists or streamers or hosts essentially just sharing to their existing audience. And so if you're an emerging artist, arguably the artist who like might need the most help right now, and who like might rely on touring more than a lot of others, if you want to do live streaming long term and grow that audience, I think there's a big barrier to it. Or you do that by being super consistent about it, like not just putting on like one acoustic set and calling it a day. Like really being consistent about it and like actively reaching out to other artists who are also live streaming, like similar to how in podcasting, I feel like so much marketing happens organically among shows. Like,
yeah, I think that is the most important way. Every person that I've spoken to that has a podcast has essentially said that you get known in podcasting by being on other people's podcasts. Basically.
Yeah, it's strange. And it's a little insular, but it works for now. It's like it's a temporary like solution given the lack of discovery infrastructure. So that's just like those are my thoughts on like the mechanics of it. In terms of the revenue, and this is directly related to the influencer economy, I've noticed a lot more brands stepping in. So like brands will sponsor whether it's like whole festival live streams that allow the performing artists to get paid, or sponsoring like individual artist streams. And I guess this is more common if the artist is at like a higher level, or like reaches more of an audience. Reaches a larger audience. And that's the influencer business model, or at least like the more traditional one is brands paying for product placement or some kind of endorsement. And so if you look globally, especially like in the last year, I was looking more into the music industries in China and India in particular. And there, this is not like a better or worse model. It's just like what it is, because streaming revenue is relatively super low. Even though they have, like probably the two biggest like populations in the world right now, right? Streaming revenue is still really low. Most people aren't paying for streaming, and in the case of India, you actually don't have that many brick and mortar venues to perform, especially on the independent level. So you don't have that many opportunities, and so in India specifically, this is already the norm in terms of brands sponsoring whether it be like I guess regular series on YouTube or just like individual performances or streams by independent artists. Like that is very much like part of that economy already. In China, and this goes all the way to like the major celebrity level. Like celebrities care more about like the brand endorsement or sponsorship than about any kind of, I guess, like direct to consumer like relationship. It's much more like celebrity and image driven. At least at like the higher level. And so it's just so like it's been going on there for a while now due to the constraints of those local economies. And I'm definitely seeing like a parallel thing happening, at least in the US now. Whereas like that previously was not the norm, like a brand sponsoring an artist live stream like that. I hadn't really seen that happen.
Besides Tiger King, besides Joe, have you, and just made this maybe simply because I didn't have a chance to really check it out, but have you seen any unknown artist or any maybe unknown entity scale since all of this started, like figure out a way to kind of become immensely more popular? I mean, I guess the thing I would think of would be like D Nice, the DJ, who kind of kicked off, but at the same time, he was already in those spaces. It was just almost like representing him to the world as the thing he already was, because he had already DJ'd for the Obamas. He had already he's already been a fixture in a certain world, but I guess anybody being able to see Joe Biden or Michelle Obama or Oprah or something like that commenting was, to me, I guess what made him become a press topic. But I'm wondering if anybody else who doesn't have those connections, who doesn't already exist in that sort of space, has successfully been able to scale in any way, even if it's even not simply music, even podcasting. Like, have you heard of anything or seen anything?
Let's see. So I think this depends on like what level of scale you're thinking of. But so one of the most popular music channels on Twitch, period, right now is Kenny Beats' channel. Do you know Kenny Beats? He's like a hip-hop producer. Yep. So I think he's done a really good job of growing an audience and streaming consistently solely on Twitch. So I think it's like almost every weekday for like over a month now. He's been going live on Twitch for a couple of hours. Usually most of that will consist of just like making a beat live, and usually he'll like call in other producers or collaborators that he's worked with in the past just to chat about music, about the current moment. And all those streams are only available to paying subscribers. So you can subscribe. So you can subscribe to his Twitch channel for I think it's $5 a month, and get access to all the streams and to a Discord server that's like dedicated to his community around the stream. And the server is super active, and I think there are over 1,200 people in the server already. So it's like grown quite a bit.
Do you know what it was before? Just simply because Kenny was one of those people that had been on Twitch for years now, and
that's true. Yeah,
his show, his Twitch show, YouTube show. I'm not really sure where it actually started. Has been pretty big, at least in the space, for the last couple of years. So this has definitely been an acceleration of it, but it is interesting to see that he is monetizing it, because that is what I didn't think was happening.
Yeah. Okay. I actually, thank you for mentioning that, because I actually wasn't aware that it was like that it was bigger before. I just like subscribed recently to see like how it was growing, but yeah, I think it's definitely grown a lot in the past like month or so. And in the Discord server, people can like submit their own beats to be included in his like beat live stream process. Was that part of the show as well?
No, that was the thing, is that what he used to do, and I'll send it to you right now. Essentially what he was doing was he was inviting artists over and would do either live streams like you were saying, or a really quick sort of cut down version of it. The biggest one, I think you already know it. It was Kenny Beats and Zach Fox, and it went viral. And that's sometime last year. So that hold on, I'll message you this. That was kind of the thing, I think, that let everybody discover him. I just sent you that link, so you'll get you know. But so I think he had scaled it already, and he's done exceptionally well in this space. Another hip hop producer that actually has been also far ahead in terms of this digital economy has been Illmind. I'm not sure if you and he's really blown up by selling instrumental and drum kits online. It's called it's BLAP, basically BLAP, and the BLAP kit, BLAP chat. He has live events. I guess now he's doing Zoom specific events, and he's also doing daily sort of live beat, sort of live production sort of things. It's I do wonder if this time will favor different kinds of, because right now what we've been talking about, surprisingly, are all producers or beat makers, right? Going from chill lo-fi stuff to people like Kenny Beats. And outside of Tory Lanez, who I guess just got kicked off again, Instagram Live or whatever. Oh
gosh, really?
Yeah, it's quarantine radio.
Okay, yeah.
Who do you think comes out on top to a certain extent in this sort of?
I was so I was thinking of other examples of artists who are growing really well in this climate, and I think this like answers your question somehow. So another example of an artist who has grown a lot like recently on Twitch, and who wasn't on Twitch previously but is like really suited for the platform, is not a hip-hop artist. She's like a folk pop singer songwriter named her artist name is MXM Tune. Have you heard of her?
MXM Tune? No, but I'll look it up.
Maya is her real name. She's she grew her audience initially on YouTube, performing covers just like on her with her and her ukulele, like in her
Okay.
bedroom. So this connects back to what we were talking about in terms of like YouTube bloggers or just like YouTube native musicians. So she was definitely one of those. And then she's like, I would say she's like equal parts a musician and an influencer just in terms of how she engages her audience. Like she's super active on TikTok and will post a lot of things that have nothing to do with her own music. So she started like releasing her original songs, which are I think they're really good. They're like she actually like writes all of her own songs. But she also is like very like leads heavily to a lot of like memes and challenges that are on TikTok. And then recently she started streaming on Twitch, has been playing a ton of Animal Crossing and like a lot of other games. And she has a personality for it. And so this goes to your question about like which artists are better suited, at least in the immediate term, to adjust to live streaming and to like platforms like Twitch and Instagram that are like blowing up now. It's definitely artists with a certain personality. MXM June in particular is very comfortable with being like openly vulnerable and like very transparent about how she's feeling, what she's going through right now. For sure, like not all artists feel that way. And at least thinking from the fan or viewer's perspective, I think that sense of openness and vulnerability is actually important for making a live stream feel really effective or memorable. And this is one reason why I think even if you're performing a set on a live stream, it's not analogous to a show. I think it's not analogous to a show because there's no stage in the same way. And so it's just like crystallized for me yesterday, like the concept of stage presence is so different in like an in-person, like a brick and mortar venue versus on a live stream.
Very much so.
Because you don't, you have the audience there, but they're reacting in a very different way. Like you don't hear the applause, you like can't see their faces most of the time. So you have to think of other ways to engage them, and also for yourself to feed off of their energy in a way that isn't like immediate applause, but there is like a chat box. Like how can you take advantage of that? Make the experience more interactive, make it more conversational, I think, as a result. So artists who are more open to that conversation they've definitely been like, whether it's someone like Kenny or MX17, like they've definitely been the ones to adopt these platforms more easily.
Yeah, I did forget somebody. I think Doja Cat has been doing extremely well in the space as well. Like every time I'm like, what is she doing? She's running her own stage play just every day.
Yeah.
She's exactly. I mean, this has actually been, I think, amazing for her. I do think that she's actually someone that's going to come out on the other side a certified star. You know, whereas I think sometimes you exist in this space where every year they always try to throw us new divas or new stars, especially when it comes to women. There's always kind of like this tier where it's like, oh yeah, this is the new one, and then that one disappears, and then this is the new one, and that disappears. But the same 3 or 4 always maintain their presence up top, and then every 5 to 10 years you'll get a Cardi B. You'll get someone who scales and stays, and now they become the way that I always describe it is all those people then become a conduit for everybody to rally around and essentially give the best music to. You know, like there's for instance, only reason because I think they kind of look alike, even though they really don't. But Tinashe, right?
Okay, yeah.
So Tinashe years ago had this issues in general as it related to how she was being treated in terms of the music industry and by her label, and how songs that she maybe demoed were essentially being taken away and given to like Rihanna or given to all of these sort of people. And that's because, in my opinion, if you don't really, you can come into this industry one of two ways. You come in where you have the team built and you don't rely on the hit making ability of the industry to present you those sort of ideas. Or you kind of catch some sort of viral or some sort of lightning in a bottle moment where a song that you wrote just happens to work, but you don't know the process enough to be able to replicate it. So then you need the industry to help push you. And I think that, I think that people fail often in that plateau, because if given the decision, me as a producer, songwriter, if I'm this song that I have that I think is a quote unquote hit, it's going to go to who's going to make it a hit. It's going to, and where the dollars are going to come in behind that. And really, those conduits are very far and few between. It's very rare that Beyonce is losing a song to Rihanna, or Rihanna is losing a song to, let's say, Beyonce, right? It's just, but I also think that they know how to choose their songs wisely. But I do think that Doja Cat is moving into that space now, where it'll be, she's definitely going to be maybe we may be talking about her in a year or two as kind of being like where Instagram sort of built Cardi B, the sort of the live streaming, IG live, always on, always a weird character on Twitch, on IG live, and whatever is what's going to have made Doja Cat kind of like the scale of celebrity that I think she'll be coming out of it. Yeah, I do wonder what any of this is going to be like. Is there anything that you would like to see that you feel like artists are not doing yet?
There's anything that I would like to see. Okay, so there are two things that come to mind. One, I just had to follow up that on what you're just saying, and about Doja Cat specifically, but also about the kinds of artists that are best suited for or to adapt to this particular time. I've noticed that, or I've realized that the way music marketing works, at least on the recorded music side, once you're at a certain level, it can take up to a year to plan that out normally, right? Yeah. Like you plan 6 months to a year out about like all the services you want to hit, all the kinds of partnerships that you want, when you're going to post what on social media. And I've noticed a lot of album campaigns have been postponed because they want to see like they don't necessarily want to see their original plan through like word for word or like exactly, but they're afraid of like they're like afraid of releasing the music too early, or they just want to like keep it like as intact as possible.
Yeah.
Whereas like I'm most excited personally by the artists who are like not held back by that and who are still like releasing music and creating, and obviously like very like stressful and unfortunate situations, but who aren't necessarily like waiting for this to subside. And this goes to sorry, this is like an aside, but this goes to what you're saying about like music's cultural importance.
Yeah,
like I've been thinking a lot recently about the concept of like what is essential right now, because there's a lot of conversation around that, mostly in the context of like government policy, like what businesses are open or not in a given city. And I feel like music and art in general is like really essential in this moment. It's just maybe it has to be like reframed or like is essential in a different way than what these artists like had originally planned. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it won't make as much of an impact if you like release it now versus later. So so I've been that is already happening, and I hope to see more of that in terms of artists being okay with being more spontaneous, creating more spontaneously in the moment, as opposed to having to keep everything kind of behind closed doors and just waiting for this to subside. So that's one thing. Two, I'm really interested in. This is partially related to how a lot of musicians are acting more like vloggers or like podcasters, which maybe like puts more pressure on them. But I think like on the content level, I'm noticing different kinds of entertainment merging together more and more. So I guess one recent case study was the Travis Scott set, Fortnite, quote unquote, in Fortnite. Which was not not the first time Fortnite had done that. They'd done that with Marshmallow like
Yeah.
a little over a year ago. But
Do you know what the numbers were for that versus the Marshmallow numbers?
yeah, I believe it was 12.3 million viewers.
Okay, so he beat him by 2 million.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and I think yeah. So not only did he beat it by 12 million, I think the setup was very different because I think with Marshmallow it was a live performance and that he was like wearing a motion capture suit and there were a bunch of cameras around him and he was like actually DJing. Whereas I'm pretty sure this Travis Scott performance was completely premeditated. I guess in part because of the current situation, he like couldn't perform like live with that equipment, so it was like all animated ahead of time, but people could like still watch it as their character in this game and like have it be more interactive in that sense.
Did you see the video from it? It looked insane. That was the thing to me that was very much of a I didn't think it would be a game changer in the same way, but when when Travis Scott is 1,000 feet tall and it's very it put it was like a light bulb that went off like, oh, okay, so now we can really, if we start thinking about AR down the line or VR experiences, rather than chasing how can I make this thing look the most like reality, going in the opposite direction and saying how can I make this thing look so surreal that it creates an entirely different experience.
Totally.
Because it would be extremely interesting if Travis was able to perform VR AR with a mocap suit on, but he still was 1,000 feet tall, and then the fans are like, he can pick one up and do whatever, and like
that'd be hilarious. Yeah,
or having all the crazy sort of because he was like disappearing, spinning around, coming back, all of that. It definitely was just like, oh, okay, this could be a really interesting weird world. It doesn't need to replace the live show experience, but it may be able to add an entire new layer onto what that could be and what the at-home viewing experience or interactive experience could be.
Absolutely. Yeah. This could be like a whole other hour-long conversation in terms of like VR and AR music, but I think that's the key in terms of not using the tech to try to replicate reality, because unless you're able to replicate the feeling of like being in a crowd of people and like them all cheering and like you feeling their energy and like the heat in this like very dark venue, until you can like really closely replicate that, I don't think people are gonna use VR to like tune into like a live broadcast of a show. In the traditional sense. Rather, like it's I think that tech is at its most exciting when you're building like entirely new worlds from scratch that are just impossible to replicate, so impossible to do in the real world. And it's totally like two different kinds of value to see Travis Scott in the flesh at a show and like watch him do his thing versus to be at home and see this like larger than life world that he's created in this game. I think they're absolutely complementary.
No, I think it's dope. I did want to touch on something that you on your aside before, because I was trying to wrap it all up. I have this very weird inkling. I'm trying to connect a bunch of nodes of what we've been talking about. That the drop in streaming numbers is not simply associated with routines being broken, although I'm sure it is, but for the bigger artists, for the artists that streaming has been extremely important to their economy, their personal economy. I think what they also share oftentimes is some of the biggest artists are also club artists, in that their music is club friendly. It has been, because hip hop has been so dominant in streaming sphere. And you think about the Rap Caviar playlist. The Rap Caviar playlist is a turn up playlist. The Rap Caviar playlist is a very energetic, very, I'm ready to go out. I'm in the club. I'm in those sort of, in that state. And that has driven a lot of of streaming, success. Whenever they want to talk about it, they're always going back to that sort of thing. And I wonder if because nobody's in the club, that music holds less importance in their life. And I wonder if the long term, or at least in the that potentially the long term result or side effect of this is that we're going to get different kinds of popular music, different, not necessarily different genres, but getting to a more either headphone based, like when we talk about lo-fi stuff like that, or maybe more a better quality of music, because then this ties to the other node. Because when we watch the success of what's happening on IG Live, right, with these versus battles, we don't really know the numbers because obviously IG Live caps out at 500,000, right? So I know that I heard Swiss and Timbo saying that I think 4 million people were trying to get into the last battle.
Wow.
Those things are doing extremely well, and the D-Nice and Questlove's DJ sets are doing extremely well because the music that is being played in it holds a certain quality and weight that is extremely nostalgic for obviously the people that are listening to it, educational for the young people who are kind of tuning in that may not have been a part of those eras. But it's not frivolous sort of club music that can be talked about now. You know, when you think about, if you think about the success of all of those things, all the music that connects all of that is again kind of like of a certain weightiness. And I wonder if we might have a summer, fall, going into winter again of a different kind of quality. Basically, like if we're going to get, you know, like the Jay Electronica album was very interesting that the Jay Electronica, basically Jay-Z collab album, comes out right at the top of this, because that was an album that may not have been focused on in the same way, because it isn't the new Travis Scott album. It isn't the new, you know, frivolous pop release, frivolous hip hop release. But now it's something that you if you want to listen to this, you have to be able to digest it and dissect it and sit with it. And even though the numbers weren't that crazy, because I think it only did 25,000 the first week, whatever the streaming equivalent numbers are, it feels like it still is hanging in the air a little bit longer than it may have before. And the same thing with this West Side Gun album, which is again going against the entire going against let's say whatever the new Da Baby album or Little Baby album, or you know, sort of the rap club du jour. It feels like those things aren't sitting around long because people want things that maybe are just of a certain level of quality, you know, which is kind of why, because isn't there also a rise in radio happening at the same time? Right now?
Such an interesting question. Yeah, so I've a couple of things that come to mind. So one, I think, so some people from the world of musicology have pointed out, like, so I listen a lot to the podcast Switched on Pop, which takes like a very like musicological music theory approach to analyzing pop songs. And they and a bunch of other writers have noticed that, so like last summer, I think there were a lot of major publications saying, like, asking, why are the songs this summer so sad? Like they're all like very gritty or like more down tempo or like even like whispery in terms of how the artists are like singing the lyrics. Whereas now you have albums like Dua Lipa's Future Nostalgia that came out that I personally thought it was really good. And it also, that's interesting because it also sounded like it was definitely made for a club, but because it's like very, so made for like parties, but it also has a very nostalgic element to it. Like it's literally baked into the name, lots of like disco elements. And it provides, I guess, like a even like a marginal shining light positivity on the current moment. And so I think it checked off like all those like boxes. And so people really, I think they resonate with a lot of people. So yeah, I guess I'm on the fence about whether, so I think there'll be both more, definitely more like chill down tempo music coming out, given that that's definitely growing for a lot of people. I think, and with radio specifically, a lot more people are listening to like to, I think, to news radio and like news podcasts specifically. So it's not so much music,
Okay.
but sorry, just to like tie it back, I'm kind of thinking out loud.
No problem.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about like someone like Drake and what his mind is going through right now. Because Drake, I feel like his I don't know if it's like a strategy, it's like a state. Drake is just like everywhere by default, right? Like if you like at any other time of the year, if you go to the mall, if you go grocery shopping, if you go definitely like to the club, or just like wherever else, like maybe even like work, you'll probably hear his music like all throughout the day, especially on the radio, right? So what does it mean to be omnipresent in a world where everyone's at home? I think the sound will definitely have to change. I mean, you kind of saw this with his last single. I think he like leaned really heavily into the TikTok side of it.
Oh yeah, the 2C slide is
like,
essentially it's a TikTok dance. Yeah, for old people, it's a TikTok dance for old people. That's why I say.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but I think we'll see a lot more of that. Like, how do you build songs that people can engage with at home in a accessible way through dance challenges? So those can still be loud. But in terms of making songs that people will want to listen to and tune into in a way that like aids them throughout their day, I think it'll definitely be aimed towards like quieter or more chill. But I think, people definitely still need more uplifting music right now. And so I think that the trend that's been kind of like inching its way into the zeitgeist that had already been doing that pre-pandemic, I think will be amplified even more as well.
Yeah, I just, I think the thing is, I wonder if, if you listen to enough Babyface and Teddy Riley and, The Dream and Timberland and Swiss and Neo and Jonte Austin, it's a realization like, oh yeah, it isn't just that I'm old, or it isn't just that I don't connect with the music anymore. There was a level of craftsmanship that was being applied even to club songs back then. And I wonder if the slowdown, and I'm just going to say this I'm just going to preach to the potential creators, use the slowdown, because there's nothing to no longer rush for. Take the time to make the records with more weight, to make these records. When you hear, Babyface and Teddy Riley going back and forth, you're hearing so many different generations of quality. It doesn't matter if they were, Teddy always leaned very heavily in club friendly records. He invented an entire New Jack Swing genre, essentially taking hard hip hop club drums and putting R&B over it. But those records still, again, carry a certain weight, a certain quality that I feel like a lot of the club records now don't necessarily. And I do wonder if this will be a reminder to people like, oh yeah, even to the people in the music industry that are tuning in, just to be like, oh yeah, maybe we should try making something that feels like this a little bit more, that feels like it can hang around for a little bit. Because if you can't go to the club every weekend, you're not chasing anything speed wise, that you can let things sit a little bit longer. I don't know. I mean, at least that's my hope.
Or like an add-on question to that, like how can artists use their craft right now to connect with fans and audiences who really need that connection, whether it's like opening up a little bit more, as we were talking about, like a lot of these producers are doing, or outside of hip hop, Charlie XCX has been hosting these weekly Zoom calls with fans for her latest album that she's making, which like I feel like an artist of her stature in any other situation, like historically, would probably not do. Like it would be a lot more behind closed doors. But here's an example, of like marketing strategies really adapting to the time. Like she's making an album in the span of a month. kind of the marketing is rolling out and evolving in real time. And like her label, which is a major label under Atlantic, is like adapting alongside ever happen. Or I feel like it would be relatively rare for a major label to just like spend only a month, like releasing an album, let alone like bringing fans in into the process. So yeah, and I think with Charlie XCX in particular, she is being very open about her craft and the process. And I guess if you don't have that process, what can you really, like, what is there really to do to engage audiences along the way? Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I do, and that may be a thing. It may need to be, artists may need to take note of that to realize this all may be pulling back the curtain a little bit. May also be beneficial to young aspiring artists so that they can kind of, oftentimes when artists tell their story, they're telling a hero story, right? They're like, yeah, and so one day I just made this song in like 10 minutes and then turned around and now it's a hit and now I have my own sneakers. And you're just like, wait a minute, did that happen that fast? Well, then that means I can do that. As opposed to now when it's just like, oh, if you watch Kenny Beats live stream, if you watch Illmind's live stream, if you watch the Charlie XCX streams, and you're talking about making a product and you're like, oh, this takes a lot. This is not simply just, oh, I wrote this song in 10 minutes and it's over.
Yeah.
It's like, some words kind of came down quickly, but then you have to go back and listen and recut and do, there is a real process. And I hope that even for the young aspiring people, they can kind of get, they can see that it isn't an easy bake oven, that to make songs that really stick and last and have a certain level of quality, it does take a bunch of time. But I don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you so much. We're running at like an hour and 10 minutes. So I just have one last question, and hopefully we'll be able to find something interesting in it. I know that like hip hop is not necessarily like the first and only thing that you listen to, but I wonder if there is anything in listening to it that it has taught you that you kind of maybe apply from a distance, in your regular life, or if not hip hop, music in general.
What has listening to hip hop taught me?
Yes.
It's a very good question. Let's see. What's been? I need to give me like 5 seconds to like think through this.
All good.
Huh. It's a very interesting question.
It doesn't have to be specifically simply listening. It could be everything related to it culturally, like any sort of interactions that have happened with you, your friends, listening to it, or just in the larger cultural space in terms of fashion, language, anything.
Yeah, I mean, so something that I've learned that's been like really interesting to think about in terms of like also learning about the history of the music industry from people who have been working in music for a lot longer than I have is learning about the connection between music and identity. So this it comes up a lot of conferences, mostly like a lot of definitely older people in the industry will say, oh, like back in our day, like people used to wear like band t-shirts all the time, or like definitely like the music they listened to was intimately tied to the clothes that they wore or like the people that they hung out with. And I feel like, so I guess so two things. So one, that's like one thing that stands out the most to me about hip hop is that it's, I guess it's definitely, it absolutely is not just a kind of music. It's a whole different lifestyle, has a whole different history. I guess hip hop is where some of those interesting conversations are had about, like whether the extent to which people should like honor history. Like this comes up a lot where like rappers will, there's actually an interesting like conversation happening around this in like Asian hip hop. So I've been following some like groups like 88 Rising as an example, or like rappers from all over Asia, both East and South and Southeast Asia. And a lot of them, like the way that rap is coming up there, I feel like a lot of it is coming up in the context of these like very flashy reality shows. Like China and Korea have their own like rap reality shows, and a lot of those shows act as funnels for the winners to get like major label deals and major brand endorsements and things like that. But there really isn't that much conversation around like the history of hip hop in the US at all in the situations. It's like there it's it kind of like the fashion and like the clothes and the lifestyle takes like really like to extreme level like precedence over thinking about like the history of like how the genre came to be and how it even got there in the first place. And so there's a really interesting ongoing debate there around what the extent to which that should change. And I think some artists in Asia are like opening up more to that. But so there's that. And then two, so I think I don't think it's a debate in my mind that hip hop music is pop music. But I think the way that it's like categorized or sold sometimes, like some people, that hasn't like registered for some people. So that's just something that I've noticed.
It's racism. So. That's actually
yeah. So there's like, and this conversation has been going on for years, but I'm just thinking of how Tyler, the Creator, was talking at the Grammys, I believe, about the term urban and how he's like really not about that. It was just like I forgot the exact phrasing he used, but he said it was just like basically another way of saying like the N-word in like the music industry, which I think was like a really powerful statement. And yeah.
I mean, he's right. I mean, hip hop, the term we use, is not coined by the participants in the genre, right? Like hip hop literally was a journalist. I forgot what New York paper it was that kind of just, took what was happening in the Sugar Hill Gang song, hip hop, hip to the hippity hip hop, and then turn that into being like, okay, that's what it is. And, R&B, the way that we think about it in all of its iterations, was the same thing, is essentially, especially in the early music industry, when so many songs were covers, they were like, okay, well, how do we separate the Jackson 5 from the Carpenters version of the song? Oh, well, this is the black version of the song, so it's R&B, and then the Carpenters version is pop, right? And so, and that's baked in, unfortunately, into the industry to begin with, and now we are in this weird space where, people talk about, hip hop being the biggest genre. It's always been. It just hasn't. We didn't have the metrics to say it was because it could easily be sort of hidden. But when you think about the amount of money, when you see people like Kanye, but even further back, you look at someone like Jay-Z, Puff, Dr. Dre, Russell Simmons, there aren't that many people in other genres that are similarly financially positioned after the 90s, right? And so it's like, wait a minute, if these people became some of the richest people, period, in the United States off of a genre, how was it not even then the biggest genre in the in the country at the same time? But we could go into that forever. We could do another one on that alone. But thank you so much for taking the time to be on here, Cherie.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks again for having me.
And enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks. Bye.